In this brief video, I'm going to show you how to do web requests with Appli. But before I show you how to do it, let's talk a bit about web requests. For Appli and for this video, we are talking about calling a web server API. So some service is offering an API that you can call, like talk to a database, query some catalog, do some in-app purchasing. Like there are API servers for all kinds of things. So let me explain what a web request is, because some of our viewers might not be that familiar with them. For this example, I'm going to use a service from the Internet Archive called the Open Library. So you can think of it as querying a librarian, querying your library catalog. Basically, for example, asking for the title of a book and getting the metadata for the book. So that's what we'll be doing here. So we'll be calling this API the Open Library Search API. All web requests and web APIs have an endpoint, which is an address that you call, and you send data to this address and then get data back, as if you're making a request and then there is a response. So, for example, suppose we want all the information about that the library has about titles called The Lord of the Rings. You can see it's making a request to that address and it's passing a title, Lord of the Rings. And then it's querying the library, and you can see that it found 426 items in the catalog. Let's pick the first one. The first one is called Lord of the Rings, and you get lots of information, you know. So that's basically what we'll be calling. So let me show you some parts of a web request. Why I'm showing this in the browser? Because I want to show you parts of what makes a web request, because once we are in Appli, we are going to reference those parts. You don't need to know anything about what I'm doing here in the browsers, mostly so I can show you. So we made this request to the Open Library API, and we queried by works with a title, Lord of the Rings. I'm just reloading here so that we can see the request happening. So this is the request. All requests have a method, an address. Like you can see, the method is here is a get method. An address was passed. You have headers. So let's see the headers. You have the request headers, and you have the response headers. Headers are pairs of a key and a value. For example, what's the current date, what file you're requesting, and they provide lots of information for the request. You both send headers and receive headers back. And you also receive a response back. So these are the headers. We didn't send anything, so there is no payload for the request. And we received a JSON back. A JSON is a very popular format to send structured data back. So what I want you to a takeaway from this is that requests have a method, an address, they might have a payload, they might have headers, and the response you get back might have headers and will have a payload, and also a status. So 200 means things were okay. Let's go back to Appli. So let's do a request much like we did on the browser. We are gonna add a little field element, search terms. We'll add a little button to do the search. And let's make them the same size. And let's align them. And instead of displaying like a list of all the results, let's pick the first result, and we are going to display the title of that work. I'm going to duplicate this. Oops. Press the wrong keyboard shortcut. I'll just like copy and paste. That works. And this will be the author. And I'm also going to show the first sentence in the book. So for this to work, we need to switch some properties here so that we can show the first sentence. So we need to wrap the text and don't do any vertical alignment. So this is enough. And then we need to rename this. This is going to be the author, and this is going to be first sentence. So now our UI is ready. We can start scripting the search terms. Sorry, the search button. So when we get a mouse click, first thing we need to do is to pick on the search term. So let's set a variable, and the element is our search terms, and I'm going to place it into a variable called search terms. Oops. Once we have that, let's set a variable with the endpoint for that request we're going to make. Let's call it URL, and it is HTTPS. And let's copy it from here. So once we have our search terms and our URL, for this request, we need to concatenate them to make a URL with a query string, which is that part with the title. And to do that, we can combine values. So we'll combine the URL, and the query string is separated from the address with a question mark. And we know we are just searching for titles, so we can go like titles equal, and then our search terms. And we are just going to place that into the same URL variable we've been using. We are going to overwrite it. But there is one thing that I forgot to do, which is in URLs, a space character is replaced with a plus sign. So we need to replace that in the search term. So let's do that. And the text to replace is space. And the replacement is a plus sign. And we are doing that in the search terms. And we are overwriting the search terms with the replacement. And this, of course, needs to happen before everything. So once we have that, we have the URL, we can make the request. Since those requests might take a while to process, especially if they are returning lots of values, it's a good idea to show a loading animation, such as searching. And then we do the request. So the action is REST API call, the ones that make web requests, because you're usually calling a REST API server. REST is a way of doing API servers that's basically the de facto standard these days. You basically have REST and GraphQL. All the other standards are very rare. So we called it REST API call. You can find it on, where is it? Here, Appli Connect, REST API call. So I'm gonna fill this information, like all the parameters last. I'll just go like, let's fill in the parameters for the REST API call. So method is a get. The endpoint URL is our URL. This, we are not sending, the body is the payload you're sending. We are not sending anything, so it doesn't matter what we select here. So just gonna put this. We are not sending any custom headers. We are not sending any request body. So let's just create a variable called empty with nothing. So this is the important bit. The response body is the variable that will contain the result from the request. It will contain the data we see here, all this. So we can call it, for example, just response. We also need a variable to hold the headers. Let's call this headers. And one to contain the status code, such as and we don't need to fill those. Those are for if, for example, you're making a progress bar and you need to receive how many bytes you send, how many bytes you received, you can use those two, but they are not essential for what we are doing now. So with this, we'll make a request, and once the request is done, the data will be in the response variable. Oh, I forgot to hide the loading screen. So let me just hide it. As you notice here, we are making the request, but we are not picking the data and inserting into the elements. We are gonna do that later. I just want to show you first like how the request is done and how the response variable looks like after the request is done. So let's do it. The Lord of the Rings. Let's search. And now if we go to the variable viewer, we can see that the response is an array. Oh, see, 0 results, which sounds odd because there should be something. But see, there is a bug here. I used titles instead of title. So like I mistyped it. Let's fix our code. It's here. Let's try it again. Now, if we look at the variable again, you can see, just like in the browser, we have our items here. So the response for each API call is different by server. You need to check the documentation. We are talking to a specific library API here, just as a sample case to show you how it's done. So let's fill in the data here. And we are going to use get array value. So the array is the response array, and path is which element you want to pick. So we know that it's inside docs. We are going to pick the first doc. We pick the author name, and we know that authors, a book might have more than one author, so author name is an array, and we're going to get the first one. And you're going to place it into an element, the author element. We can duplicate this twice. to get the other data. So for the title, we can just get the title. So books don't usually have more than one title, so it's just title here. And if you have any difficulty checking these paths, you can open the variable viewer and then tile them together and hide this so you can see everything, and then you can look for it here. So docs1 title, we are into docs1, and then we can look for title, and then the first sentence. First sentence is also an array, so we're getting the first sentence, which sounds odd. And this goes into, where is, oops, not a variable. Goes into an element. And let's move. Done. Don't need this. So let's try again. As you can see, let's try some other book. No first sentence for that one. As you can see, that's how you make a web request. And you can see all the documentation here explaining how it works. And if you need any help with web requests, you can just reach out to us in our forum at forums.appli.io. Web requests are a complex topic, so do not hesitate calling for help. We are here to make your app work for you. And if you need like some hand holding, I'll be there to help you out. I hope you like this new feature. It's a very powerful, very versatile feature. And I can't wait to see which apps you're going to make and how you're going to power them with web APIs. See ya.